A time of sifting and of pondering, for British poets with pointless verses, my own great strength, my own great standing, give dismay to the chorus of poets. And with that introduction, I welcome you to the first proper episode of my podcast, Author Talks, it seems to be becoming. And in case you're wondering, that opening quote was from a 2019 new translation of the Book of Taliesin, which is considered pretty much one of the great pieces of Welsh poetry and one of the earliest surviving big examples of Middle Welsh poetry. So, hello anyone who bothers to tune in. I am Thomas Wrightson, author, and I am at the end of a day where I have been struggling to finish the last book in a long series that's been going on since pre-COVID. That gives you some idea of how long it's been. Anyway, some things that I didn't touch on in the introductory episode that I probably should have mentioned. I am an author who is not yet published, but I'm scheduled to be published this year, later this year if all goes to plan. I'm currently with Roan and Weatherford, a publishing company based in Arkansas, and it has been such a journey going along with them. There's been so many things that needed to be done in some way or another. I mean, when things are all out and everything, then I would love to give you some lovely little inside stories about the editing process, but at the moment I feel like that would be jumping the gun. My creative shout out for this episode, this debut episode, is to Emily Inkpen. She is a writer of science fiction, novels, short stories, and she is currently on Kickstarter with a project for the second series of The Dex Legacy. It's a dark political science fiction audio drama, quoting from the Kickstarter page, and it's for the very modest kickstarting price of £3,500, which, if you know your Kickstarter fundings, is tiny compared to a lot of stuff that needs to be that gets asked to be kickstarted. She has already done the first season. It's been very popular from what's been seen and reported. She has based this on her own forthcoming trilogy of science fiction novels, and it's set on Seed Planet SP714, where a munitions corporation, Dex Industries, led by notorious megalomaniac Nathaniel Dex, has declared itself an independent nation. And the story follows Dex's 3 adopted children who take a stand against their father. It sounds awesome. I have yet to get round to actually listening to the audio drama. I'll probably have to rectify that, if only for experience. So, if you can, please support Emily Inkpen through Kickstarter, produced by Alternative Productions. It's probably going to be a lovely throwback to those ye old audio dramas of yesteryear that we all grew up listening to and probably don't admit listening to now, but come on, we all know we enjoyed them. So yeah, create a shout out, Emily Inkpen, go you! So this first episode I would like to talk about a thing that I've actually been finding enjoyment in over the last several months. It's part of what I mentioned before, Hobby Horse. It's a multimedia project that dates all the way back to 2002 and kind of dropped with a big damp thud in 2005. I guarantee that 9,900 people out of 10,000 or whatever it is, not good at math, will not have heard of this. It's called Code Age. Code Age is interesting from a developmental standpoint because it started out as a project created by Square artist Yusuke Naora and was originally going to cover a PlayStation 2 and a mobile game. But with the merger of Square and Enix in 2003, Enix brought with them a manga publishing division. You know, the Gan imprint label was started by Enix before it became known with Square Enix. This gave Naora a means of expanding Code Age a little bit further. The project was now split between 3 different storylines or properties set within the same universe: Code Age Archives, Code Age Brawl, and Code Age Commanders. What is Code Age? Well, in premise it's actually a rather interesting science fiction story, set on the inside of a Dyson globe that undergoes a catastrophic event that exterminates the native population every 10,000 years or so. The storyline is about the latest civilization and its efforts to survive the latest reborn, as it's called. But that's the premise. The original stories, I couldn't really tell you about them because it's never been fan translated and it's never been localized. Why? Well, unfortunately, for all it was an ambitious project, Code Age was a commercial flop in Japan. The 11-chapter manga never saw republication. The mobile Code Age Brawls was shut down in just over a year, and Code Age Commanders sold terribly. Now, Oda said that any further extensions to the universe, which was brought under Square Enix's rather notorious polymorphic content policy, would be dependent on the series' success, and Christopher Koji Fox, known for his localization efforts for Final Fantasy XIV and XVI, said that a complete translation of Code Age Commanders was completed, but then Square Enix pulled the plug on a North American release. And so, ultimately, Code Age lived and died the death. It's never seen a wide release, and it is the cultiest of cult creations, if it even has a fan base at all. But I found it by accident, and I kind of like it. It has a unique art style and an interesting premise. The main thing that it doesn't have going for it is that from what's been revealed to me, of the little bits I can understand of Japanese, it didn't have the most engaging story, shall we put it that way. But despite its niche appeal, it's interesting in that it's an early example of the kind of multimedia storytelling that's practically commonplace and expected these days, spreading a universe and the various component parts of it across loads of different media. There may be a central product, in this case Code Age Commanders, but there are other aspects of the story and other characters that may make cameos in Commanders whose stories are more fully fleshed out in things like Archives and Brawls. However, this is where the Code Age concept actually scores one above a lot of the stuff that's put out today in terms of this multimedia, transmedia storytelling style. And that is, it knows when to stop. One of the things I noticed is that there are very few multimedia universes that know when to hold back, when to not split everything into everything. Take something like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'm not going to be coy. It is one of those things where if you don't know the comics and the movies or help of them, the television series, there are going to be lots of elements of the main movie cycle that if you just jump in halfway, that you're going to be completely lost on. I know I was. The part of the reason the Marvel Cinematic Universe burned me off very quickly after enjoying a few of their early outings is because they required too much commitment for a casual fan. But I think part of the reason that they're so successful may be more due to the spectacle and the brand than anything else. The writing certainly doesn't win any awards in some instances. And then there are things from my personal area of hobby interest, like Halo, Final Fantasy XV. There are things like that where story that you would think is essential and core to the expression of the plot as a whole is just thrust into the deepest bowels of a piece of extended media that makes you think, wait, what? This should have been in there. Now, of course, especially with something like Final Fantasy XV, there are mitigating circumstances. I mean, that whole game's development cycle is a mitigating circumstance in and of itself. But it feels like Code Age succeeded where many other series fail, even though it was a flop. You didn't need to know Code Age Commanders or Brawls to enjoy Archives. You didn't need to have played Commanders or read Archives to enjoy Brawls, and you could play Commanders as a standalone thing without needing to absorb either Brawls or Archives. Commanders could easily have come over as its own standalone thing, and that would have been, it's a thing. That's a thing. That's become a thing. But it's one of those sad flop stories that in some respects are all too common with big companies that try to go for this kind of ambitious approach. And sadly, it's one of the elements that can really trip people up when they're going towards something. Oh, here's this lovely thing. Oh, it's in a language I can't understand and split across several properties, one of which has become completely inaccessible. That is another problem with this series, in that Code Age Brawls has barely any footage anywhere. All we have is a little bit from a trailer that shows off the whole series that was shown at press events, both in Japan and in North America. It's actually quite tragic. I don't advise you go look into the development history of it all unless you want to be depressed, because there was so much potential here and it got, ganked basically by circumstances, some of them within the company's control, quite a few of them outside it. But considering what an early example it is of modern transmedia storytelling that so many companies would be touting as their creation, their innovation, I think it merits remembrance in that regard. And also, it's one of the earliest where Yusuke Naora, who is an artist I have okay opinions of, was a lead creative. And he also acted as an overall producer, and he created the story. He's not given much credit as a writer, and even if the writing itself was a bit meh, the story of Code Age was unique, to say the least. And now that my creative ranting is out of the way, let me give you a short story of my own creation. A short story that hopefully will be a little amusing for those listening. Enjoy! Rorrim Live Mirror. The scent of blood was cold, cloying. I stood, the clotting gore on my sword, as I looked up at what I'd just seen. My companions were also struck dumb. It was impossible, we'd always been told. Incredible, unbelievable, yet here it was, before us, a plain fact. Our quest had begun in such a simple way. I was a wanderer, just minding my own business, when I got called into I couldn't know what. I was paired up with a child who could smell wrongness, a man who'd been condemned to death for something I forget, and a female paladin of the Lord's Guard with a purer-than-thou attitude which often made me feel physically sick. I was just a wandering swordswoman who didn't take nonsense from anyone, even that paladin. We were told we had to travel a certain path to the Dark One's castle. I mean, you could hardly miss it. It was poking up towards the sky like a man's overexcited yard. The path we took was woefully rambling in its progress. We stopped at what felt like every single ruddy village in the entire province, dealing with any and every little thing. That's our paladin's fault more than mine. She just had to stop and help anyone and everyone who was having a little bit of trouble, even if they didn't need it. The number of old people she'd helped across the street, even when they didn't want it, and the number of people I had to stop her beheading before we'd learnt the full facts about her situation. Mind you, I had my hands full with the other two. The ex-convicts seemed to be monologuing before every fight, which was distracting, and the kid... Actually, the kid was all right. Just so utterly self-assured she made me feel very young, which was odd. Her habit of rattling off the 30 most interesting historical facts about every place we travelled through got annoying. So, anyway, we went through the towns, freeing a possessed villager here, killing a ravaging spirit there, big mess when the paladin almost slaughtered the wrong side of a familial dispute. Eventually we ended up at the Dark One's headquarters, where we were set upon by a host of the paladin's own people. Yeah, turns out we weren't actually meant to go there, but to be kind of weird sacrifice or something. The paladin lay down and readied herself, but the rest of us just Well, there's a reason I opened this account the way I did. As I cut down the last couple of idiots, the tower doors opened, and I assumed the Dark One had emerged to see what all the fuss was about. And there was my brother Rorrim. He stood there without words, without malice, at the centre of the swirling mass of shadows, holding the silly walking staff of his. He grinned and finally spoke. "Hello, sis." I was about to speak, then the paladin, who'd risen from her prone position, launched forward. "Demon! Monster! I banish you to the depths of—" I caught her by the ankle and she fell flat on her face, her armour making an almighty rattling sound. "Could you be quiet? We were trying to have a conversation." I turned to my brother. "Hi, bro. What are you doing here?" "I took on the Dark Lord's power about 2 weeks ago. I got sent here by some king or other." "You too?" "Yeah, odd story." "Your words shall not conquer us!" The paladin was getting up. "We shall strike down the wickedness and—" I hit her helmet with the hilt of my blade. She was knocked out again. For a moment I wondered what I might do. Glancing at the other two, I saw they were waiting for my say. I turned back to my brother and gave a large smile. "Let's all have tea, Rorrim. I think your story will be interesting." The end. Basically. I'd sort of vaguely thought that short story would turn into a novel idea, but it never did, but it was too good to waste. Maybe you found it funny, maybe you didn't. It's all subjective. Comedy is subjective. That could be the theme of an entire podcast series, never mind an episode. So, everyone, thank you for listening this far if you got this far. As to how frequent this podcast will be, I really don't know. It may be probably going to be semi-regular, but the amount of stuff and audio bits and pieces I've had to cope with, oh good grief, it may put me off doing them more than once every couple of weeks or so. And also there's the weird sound limits on SoundCloud, which I might have to negotiate. But my podcast available on SoundCloud, but also available through RSS, which is a very, very useful service when they get round to doing things, from what I've experienced of them so far. So, next time, I don't know. I don't know about next time. I will see about next time. See you next time. Hear you next time. And I hope you have a lovely, lovely, lovely weekend. This gave Naora a means of That was my keyboard. Okay, sorry about this, the recording went weird. This is a test to see whether I can continue from a certain point. 1, 2, 3, 4. This gave Naora a oh good grief, it's done it again, hold on. So, Code Age commanders lived and died, or rather Code Age as a whole rather. Hold on. But it's an interesting early example. Code Age commanders lived and died. Okay, if you're wondering what happened just then, the audio track stuff was getting a bit freaky and I still had my computer speakers on, and that caused a rather weird combination of vocal tracks. So, for our amusement, ladies and gentlemen, that's another problem with this sub-series. There is literally no footage of Code Age commanders in not Code Age commanders. And now, ladies and gentlemen, and anyone in between, this is the introduction of this is the introduction to, oh god,